My controlling dad hired an actress to ruin my wedding and destroy my relationship. 6 months later, he walked me down the aisle. The twist? I invited him. I, 28F, have been with my fiancé Simon, 31M, for 4 years, and our relationship has been a roller coaster of emotions, especially in recent months. We were supposed to get married last week, but everything fell apart because of my controlling father, Patrick, 55M. To understand how we got here, I need to take you back to the beginning. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, where everyone knew everyone else's business. My childhood was relatively normal until I turned 10. That's when my parents' marriage imploded in a spectacular fashion. My mom, Tanya, 50F, had been having an affair with her yoga instructor for months. When my dad found out, it was like a bomb went off in our family. The divorce was messy and drawn out. My mom, feeling guilty and wanting a fresh start, moved to California. I stayed with my dad in Ohio, more out of necessity than choice. He was a successful accountant and could provide stability, while my mom was starting over with nothing but her yoga mat and a suitcase full of regrets. After the divorce, my dad changed. The once easygoing man who used to take me fishing on weekends transformed into a strict, overprotective parent. He installed a security system that would ping his phone every time I entered or left the house. He vetted all my friends and insisted on chaperoning every school dance. At the time, I thought he was just being cautious, but looking back, I realize he was terrified of losing me like he lost my mom. I spent summers with my mom in California, but our relationship was strained. She was busy trying to build a new life, working 2 jobs and dating a series of men who seemed to get progressively younger. I felt like an afterthought in her new world, a reminder of the life she'd left behind. When I turned 18, I saw college as my ticket to freedom. I applied to schools as far from Ohio as possible and ended up at the University of Washington in Seattle. Those first few years were liberating. I made new friends, tried new things, and for the first time, felt like I could breathe without my dad watching over my shoulder. I limited my calls home to once a week, giving my dad just enough information to keep him from worrying but not enough for him to micromanage my life from afar. My mom and I exchanged occasional texts, usually on birthdays or holidays. I was determined to forge my own path, free from the baggage of my parents' failed marriage. It was during my senior year that I met Simon. My roommate dragged me to a house party, insisting I needed to live a little before graduation. That's where I saw him, tall, with messy brown hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He was trying to explain the intricacies of bridge engineering to a group of clearly uninterested sorority girls. I rescued him from that conversation, and we ended up talking all night. He was 27, working as an engineer for a local firm. He was smart, funny, and refreshingly honest. We exchanged numbers, but I was hesitant to start anything serious with graduation looming. We kept in touch over the next few months, meeting for coffee or the occasional movie. After I graduated and landed a job at a local marketing firm, our relationship naturally progressed. A year later, we moved in together. When I introduced Simon to my dad during a visit home, I was hopeful. My dad was polite, asking Simon about his job and his family. But I noticed the way my dad's eyes narrowed when Simon mentioned he'd been married briefly in his early 20s. It was a starter marriage that lasted all of 6 months, but I could see my dad filing that information away for future use. After that visit, my dad started calling more frequently. He'd casually ask about Simon, wondering if we were getting too serious. He'd remind me that I was still young and had plenty of time to settle down. I brushed off his concerns, chalking it up to his usual overprotectiveness. Fast forward to our engagement. Simon proposed on our 3-year anniversary during a hike to a beautiful waterfall. It was perfect, just us, nature, and a simple yet elegant ring. I was over the moon. When I called my dad to share the news, his reaction was like a bucket of ice water. He was silent for a long moment before launching into a tirade about how I was making a huge mistake. He brought up Simon's failed marriage, questioned his career stability, and even hinted that Simon might be after my non-existent fortune. I hung up feeling deflated and angry. As wedding planning got underway, my dad's behavior worsened. He'd call with concerns about every decision we made. The venue was too expensive, we were paying for it ourselves. The guest list was too large, it was actually quite small. The honeymoon destination was too dangerous, we were going to Canada, for crying out loud. A week before the wedding, my dad showed up unannounced at our apartment. He had a thick manila folder tucked under his arm and a grim expression that made my stomach drop. He insisted we all sit down for a family meeting. What followed was like a scene from a bad detective movie. My dad started pulling out evidence he'd gathered about Simon. There were blurry photos of Simon talking to women at bars, which turned out to be his cousins at a family reunion. He had printouts of old social media posts that he claimed showed Simon's true character. They were mostly bad jokes and memes from college. The final blow was a fake background check report that my dad had clearly fabricated himself. I was livid. I told my dad he was out of line and needed to leave. Simon, bless him, remained calm throughout the ordeal, even offering to address each of my dad's concerns point by point. We agreed to talk to my dad again in a few days, hoping he'd come to his senses once he realized how ridiculous he was being. The day before our wedding rehearsal, my dad called. He said he had irrefutable proof of Simon's misdeeds and insisted on meeting us at a cafe near our venue. Against my better judgment, and despite Simon's reservations, I agreed. I thought if we could just clear the air, we could salvage the relationship and move forward with the wedding. What happened next still feels like a bad dream. My dad showed up at the cafe with a woman I'd never seen before. He introduced her as Jennifer, 29F, claiming she was Simon's secret girlfriend. Jennifer launched into a rehearsed-sounding story about her long-term relationship with Simon, complete with details about secret rendezvous and promises of a future together. I looked at Simon, expecting to see anger or indignation. Instead, he looked completely baffled. He swore he had never seen this woman before in his life. The situation quickly devolved into a shouting match with my dad and Jennifer on one side, and Simon and me on the other. Just as I was about to storm out, Jennifer's facade cracked. She burst into tears and confessed that my dad had paid her to lie. She apologized profusely, saying she was an out-of-work actress who needed the money. She fled the cafe, leaving behind a stunned silence. The betrayal I felt in that moment was indescribable. My own father had gone to such extreme lengths to sabotage my happiness. Simon was furious, pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair. He said he couldn't go through with the wedding if my dad was going to be there. I couldn't blame him. We ended up postponing the wedding indefinitely. I was heartbroken and humiliated. We had to call all our guests and explain that there was a family emergency. Some understood, others were clearly annoyed. I felt like I was letting everyone down. Now, I'm at a crossroads. I love Simon with all my heart, and I know none of this is his fault. But he's understandably shaken and says he needs time to process everything. He's questioning whether he can be part of a family with such a manipulative father-in-law. My mom, who flew in for the wedding, is staying with us for now. She's furious with my dad and keeps apologizing for not being more present in my life. She thinks if she had been around more, she could have tempered my dad's controlling tendencies. I don't know what to do. Should I cut my dad out of my life completely? Try to salvage my relationship with Simon? Postpone the wedding for a longer period? I feel like my whole world has been turned upside down, and I'm not sure how to write it again. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. I'm lost and could use some perspective from people who aren't embroiled in this mess. Update 1, it's been 2 weeks since the wedding that wasn't, and I'm still reeling from the aftermath. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone who commented on my original post. Your support, advice, and even your harsh truths have been a lifeline during this chaotic time. These past 14 days have been a whirlwind of emotions, difficult conversations, and some surprising revelations. I've cried more than I thought possible, but I've also found strength I didn't know I had. Let me start with Simon. The day after the cafe disaster, we had a long, raw conversation that lasted well into the night. Simon didn't hold back. He was hurt, not just by my dad's actions, but also because he felt I should have put a stop to my dad's behavior long before it reached this point. His words stung, but I knew he was right. I realized I had been making excuses for my dad's actions for years, always hoping he'd change, always believing that deep down he had my best interests at heart. Simon helped me see that by allowing my dad's behavior to continue unchecked, I had been complicit in it. We decided to start couples counseling. We found a therapist who specializes in family trauma, and we've had 3 sessions so far. It's been challenging, but also enlightening. We're learning to communicate better, to express our fears and insecurities without attacking each other. Simon has been incredibly patient, and I'm grateful for his willingness to work through this with me. As for my dad, I finally gathered the courage to confront him. I asked to meet him at a neutral location, a park near my apartment. I didn't want him in our home, but I also didn't want to have this conversation over the phone. When I saw my dad, I was struck by how old he suddenly looked. His hair seemed grayer, his posture more stooped. But I steeled myself, remembering all the pain he had caused. I laid everything out, how his actions had hurt me, damaged my relationship, and betrayed my trust. I told him about the humiliation of canceling the wedding, the strain it had put on my relationship with Simon, and the trust issues it had brought to the surface. I expected him to be defensive, to justify his actions or try to shift blame. To my surprise, he broke down. He confessed that he had been struggling with depression and anxiety ever since my mom left. He said he became overly attached to me and couldn't bear the thought of losing me to someone else. He admitted that he had convinced himself that Simon was going to hurt me, and in his twisted logic, he thought he was protecting me. He showed me a letter from his doctor, revealing that he had recently been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, which explained some of his more extreme behaviors. While I empathized with his struggles, I made it clear that his behavior was unacceptable. Mental health issues might explain his actions, but they don't excuse them. I told him that if he wanted any chance of being in my life, he needed to get professional help and make amends to both me and Simon. My dad agreed to start therapy. He gave me permission to speak with his therapist, so I could be sure he was actually attending sessions and working on his issues. It's a small step, but it's something. My mom has been an unexpected source of support through all this. She extended her stay and has been helping us deal with the aftermath of the canceled wedding. She's been making calls to vendors, trying to recoup some of our deposits, and helping us figure out what to do with all the wedding favors and decorations we had already purchased. More importantly, she's been a sounding board for me. We've had some long, honest conversations about her marriage to my dad, her affair, and the impact their divorce had on all of us. She's been encouraging me to set firm boundaries with my dad, something she admits she should have done years ago. Simon and I have decided to take a short trip together next month. Nothing extravagant, just a weekend getaway to a nearby beach town. We both feel we need some time away from everything to reconnect and refocus on our relationship. We're still planning to get married, but we're taking things slow. We've agreed to revisit the idea in 6 months, giving us time to work through our issues in therapy and make sure we're both ready. As for the practical aspects of canceling a wedding, it's been a nightmare. We lost deposits on the venue and the catering. Most vendors have been understanding, but a few have been less than sympathetic. We're considering having a small dinner party for our local friends who were supposed to attend the wedding, just as a way to thank them for their support and understanding. I'm focusing on healing my relationship with Simon and learning to stand up for myself. It's not easy, there are moments when I feel overwhelmed by guilt and uncertainty. But then I remind myself that I'm doing the work, that I'm committed to change, and that's what matters. There's still a long road ahead, but for the first time in weeks, I'm feeling hopeful about the future. Thank you all again for your support. I'll update again when there's more to share. Update 2. It's been 2 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some developments with you all. Your continued support and advice have been invaluable during this challenging time. Simon and I went on our weekend trip as planned. We chose a quiet beach town about 3 hours' drive from our home. The first day was awkward, we both felt the weight of everything we'd been through, and it was hard to relax. But as the weekend progressed, we found ourselves opening up more. We had some deep conversations about our future and what we both want. Simon confessed that he's always wanted children, but my dad's behavior had made him question whether bringing kids into this family dynamic was a good idea. I shared my own fears about parenthood, worried that I might inadvertently replicate some of my dad's controlling behaviors. These conversations weren't easy, but they brought us closer. We realized we both wanted the same things: a strong partnership, a family of our own, and the tools to break the cycle of dysfunction we'd both experienced in our families. When we returned home, we made a big decision. We're moving forward with our wedding plans, but on our own terms. We're planning a small, intimate ceremony with just our closest friends and immediate family. No big production, no stress, just us celebrating our love surrounded by the people who have supported us through this difficult time. We've set a date for 3 months from now. It feels soon, but also right. We don't want to wait any longer to start our life together, and we feel that this smaller ceremony better reflects who we are as a couple. My dad has been seeing a therapist regularly. He sends me weekly updates on his progress, which I appreciate, but he's also respecting my request for space. Last week, he sent a heartfelt letter apologizing to Simon. It wasn't perfect, there were still traces of his old thinking, but it was a start. Simon and I discussed it, and we've agreed to meet with my dad next month. It'll be the first time we've seen him in person since the incident at the cafe. We're both nervous, but we feel it's necessary for closure, regardless of the outcome. We've asked our couple's therapist to be present for the meeting to help mediate if things get tense. My mom has become more involved in my life, which has been both wonderful and challenging. We're rebuilding our relationship, and I'm learning things about my parents' marriage that I never knew. She's shared stories about my dad's controlling behavior during their marriage, which helps me understand, but not excuse, some of his recent actions. She's also been open about her own mistakes, including the affair that led to their divorce. It's been eye-opening to see my parents as flawed, complex individuals rather than the one-dimensional figures I'd cast them as in my mind. The woman my dad hired, Jennifer, reached out to apologize again. She explained that she was in a tough financial situation, behind on rent and facing eviction, when my dad approached her with his scheme. She provided copies of their text exchanges and the agreement they'd made. I've kept this information, not because I plan to use it, but because it feels important to have a record of what happened. Simon and I are taking things day by day. We're stronger now, but we're still working through some trust issues. The couples counseling has been a big help. We've learned techniques for communicating more effectively and for supporting each other through difficult moments. I'm learning to stand up for myself and set boundaries, not just with my dad, but in all areas of my life. It's not always easy, I still find myself slipping into old patterns sometimes. But I'm getting better at recognizing when I'm doing it and correcting course. Work has been a welcome distraction through all of this. I recently took on a big project at the marketing firm, leading a campaign for a new client. It's challenging, but it's also helping me rebuild my confidence. Simon has been incredibly supportive, listening to my ideas and offering encouragement when I doubt myself. We've also started talking about our future beyond the wedding. We're considering buying a house in the next year or two. It feels good to be making plans again, to be looking forward instead of always glancing over our shoulders. As we approach our rescheduled wedding date, I find myself feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. But it's a different kind of nervousness than before. This time, it's not about whether we're doing the right thing, but about starting this new chapter of our lives together. Thank you all for your continued support. I'll update again after our meeting with my dad and as we get closer to the wedding. Update 3. It's been 6 months since this whole ordeal began, and I wanted to give a final update. So much has happened, and I'm in a very different place now than I was when I first posted. First and most importantly, Simon and I got married last weekend. It was a beautiful, intimate ceremony in a small garden with just 30 of our closest friends and family. It was nothing like our original plans, but it was perfect for us. We wrote our own vows, and there wasn't a dry eye in the garden when we finished. The meeting we had with my dad a few months ago went better than expected. He's been consistently working with his therapist, and the change in him is noticeable. He's less anxious, more willing to listen, and he's learning to respect boundaries. During our meeting, he apologized to both Simon and me. He admitted that his actions were driven by his own fears and insecurities, not by any real concern about Simon's character. He also shared that he's been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder and is on medication now, which has helped him manage his intrusive thoughts. After a lot of discussion and soul-searching, we decided to invite my dad to the wedding. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt right. He attended, and to his credit, he was on his best behavior. He even gave a short, emotional speech at the reception, apologizing publicly for his actions and promising to do better. It was a powerful moment of healing for our family. Simon has been incredible throughout this whole process. He's shown me what true partnership looks like, supporting me while also maintaining his own boundaries. Our relationship is stronger than ever. We've learned to communicate more openly, to trust each other more deeply, and to face challenges as a team. My mom walked me down the aisle. Over these past months, we've rebuilt our relationship, and I'm grateful for her presence in my life now. She's become someone I can turn to for advice and support, something I never thought would be possible given our strained relationship in the past. As for me, I've learned so much about setting boundaries and standing up for myself. I'm in therapy on my own now, working through some of the issues that stemmed from my childhood. It's not always easy, but I'm in a much better place emotionally and mentally. We're settling into married life now, and it feels wonderful. We're planning a belated honeymoon for next summer, a trip to New Zealand that we're both excited about. We've also started looking at houses in a nearby neighborhood, thinking about putting down roots. This whole experience, as difficult as it was, taught me valuable lessons about family, love, and self-respect. While I wouldn't wish it on anyone, I'm grateful for the growth it's brought. I've learned that it's possible to love someone while still holding them accountable for their actions. I've learned that it's okay to prioritize my own well-being and that of my relationship. And I've learned that with work and commitment, it's possible to break dysfunctional family patterns. I want to thank everyone who's followed this story and offered support and advice along the way. Your words helped more than you know, giving me strength when I felt lost and offering perspective when I couldn't see clearly. For anyone going through something similar, I want you to know that it does get better. It takes work, and it's not always easy, but it's possible to come out the other